Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Didi Ashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 19, text number 8 onwards. Shri Uddhava Vacha, Jnanam Vishuddham Vipulam Yathatat, Vairagya Vijnana Yutam Puranam, Akhyahi Vishveshwara Vishwamurte, Tad Bhakti Yogam Cha Mahad Vimrigyam. Shri Uddhav said, O Lord of the universe, O form of the universe, please explain to me that process of knowledge which automatically brings detachment and direct perception of the truth, which is transcendental and which is traditional among great spiritual philosophers. This knowledge, sought by elevated personalities, describes loving devotional service unto your Lordship. So previously Krishna talked about the knowledge, and he said once we have the knowledge, then you just surrender into Lord's lotus feet, because they don't need self-realized souls, they don't need that knowledge. So now Uddhavji is asking, so please explain to me that process of knowledge that you're talking about. Those who are able to cross over the darkness of material existence are called Mahat, or great personalities. Secondary items like cosmic consciousness or universal control do not deviate the attention of such great souls from loving service to the Lord. Shri Uddhav desires to hear knowledge of the eternal religious principles, that is the traditional aim and objective of all superior personalities. So further he says, Tapatrena abhihatasya ghore santapya manasya bhavadvanisha Vashyami Nanya Charanam Tavangri Dvandvat Patradamritabhir Varshat. My dear Lord, for one who is being tormented on the terrible path of birth and death and is constantly overwhelmed by the threefold miseries, I do not see any possible shelter other than your two lotus feet, which are just like a refreshing umbrella that pours down showers of delicious nectar. Lord Krishna, recognizing Uddhav's highly intellectual nature, has repeatedly recommended to him that one should achieve perfection by cultivation of transcendental knowledge. But the Lord has also clearly demonstrated that such knowledge must bring one to the point of loving devotion service to him, for otherwise it is useless. In this verse, Sri Uddhav corroborates Lord Krishna's statements that actual happiness is obtained by surrendering to his lotus feet. When the incarnation of Godhead Prithu Maharaj was crowned, the demigod Vayu presented him with an umbrella that constantly sprayed fine particles of water. The Lord's two lotus feet are similarly compared here to a wonderful umbrella that produces a constant shower of delicious nectar, the bliss of Krishna consciousness. Normally, a speculative analytic knowledge terminates in an impersonal conception of the absolute truth. But the so-called bliss of merging into impersonal spiritual existence can never be compared to the bliss of Krishna consciousness, as stated here by Shri Uddhav. So, merging into impersonal Brahmajyoti, it doesn't bring any happiness to the devotees or to a living entity. And this is what Uddhavji is saying. One who is suffering in the material world, only your lotus feet can give full shelter and happiness. Krishna consciousness thus automatically constitutes perfect knowledge, since Lord Krishna is the ultimate shelter of all living entities. The words abhihatasya and abhivarshat are significant in this verse. Abhihatasya indicates one who is being defeated on all sides by the onslaught of material nature, whereas abhivarshat indicates a downpour of nectar that eliminates all of the problems of material existence. By our intelligence, we should look beyond the dull material body and nonsensical material mind to observe the unlimited shower of blissful nectar coming from the two lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Then our real good fortune will begin. So, real nectar, so his lotus feet are compared to refreshing umbrella that pours down showers of delicious nectar. So, umbrella is also stopping the threefold miseries. If somebody is holding an umbrella, it stops the rain from coming and hitting him on the head and bothering him. But here, this umbrella not only stops the miseries, but also pours down showers of delicious nectar. So not only it protects us from the miseries, but it gives us happiness also. That's Krishna's lotus feet are compared. Dashtam janam sampatitam vilayasmin kalahina kshudra sukhorutarsham samudharanam kripya pavargyar vacho abhirasincha mahanubhava. O Almighty Lord, please be merciful and uplift this hopeless living entity who has fallen into the dark hole of material existence, where the snake of time has bitten him. In spite of such abominable conditions, this poor living entity has tremendous desire to relish the most insignificant material happiness. Please save me, my Lord, by pouring down the nectar of your instructions, which awaken one to spiritual freedom. So this Uddhavji is saying this, that I am like a living and hopeless living entity. I am a hopeless living entity who has fallen into the dark hole of material existence. This is humility of devotees. And because of this humility, they take shelter of the Lord, and the Lord really takes care of them. Material life, so much cherished by the non-devotees, is here compared to a dark hole filled with poisonous snakes. In material life, there is certainly no clear understanding of one's ultimate identity, of God or of the universe. Everything is vague and dark. In material life, the poisonous snake of time is always threatening, and at any moment, our near and dear ones will be killed by the mortal fangs of the serpent. So snake of time is compared to a poisonous snake, because any time it's going to bite us, we're going to die. Ultimately, we ourselves will also be bitten and killed by the poisonous effects of time. The word sampatitam indicates that the fall down of the living entity is complete. In other words, he cannot get up again. Shri Uddhav therefore appeals to the Lord to be kind to these poor fallen souls, humbly represented by his own self. If one receives the Lord's mercy, then even without further qualification, one can go back home, back to Godhead. And without the mercy of Lord Krishna, the most learned, austere, powerful, wealthy, or beautiful men will be pathetically crushed by the material world's machinery of illusion. So pathetically crushed, because in front of Krishna, nobody can do anything. And what Krishna, in front of his time just takes care of everything. But those who got the mercy of the Lord, only they will go back home, back to Godhead. The Lord's mercy is, the Supreme Personality of Godhead as described here is Mahanubhav, or the greatest, most powerful, and most merciful personality, whose influence extends everywhere. The Lord's mercy is manifest in the form of his nectarian instructions, such as Bhagavad Gita and the Uddhav Gita being spoken here. The word Kshudra Sukhoru Tarasham reveals the irony of material existence. Although material happiness is Shudra, or ridiculous and insignificant, our desire to enjoy it is Uru. Uru means tremendous. Our disproportionate hankering to enjoy dead matter is certainly an illusory state of mind, and it gives us constant distress. keeping us bound up in the dark hole of material existence. Every living entity should put aside his false prestige based on ephemeral bodily qualifications and appeal sincerely to the Supreme Lord Krishna for his mercy. The Lord hears every sincere appeal from even the most fallen soul, and the effects of the Lord's mercy are wonderful. Although Gyanis, Yogis, and fruitive workers are laboriously endeavoring to achieve their respective goals, their position is precarious and uncertain. Simply by achieving the mercy of Lord Krishna, however, one can very easily attain the highest perfection of life. If even one who's not a great or pure devotee of Lord Krishna sincerely appeals to the Lord for his mercy, the Lord is sure to give it generously. This is the beauty of the Lord. He is Bhaktavatsal. So he loves his devotees. He doesn't love yogis or karmis or jnanis or anybody else. He just loves his devotees. And the devotee means they've just taken shelter of the Lord, lotus feet of the Lord. And they are always praying to the Lord for his mercy. Meanwhile, they're performing their sadhana. They're doing their sadhana, doing all the uh, services that Krishna has asked for or Prabhupada has asked for. But we know, without mercy of the Lord, I cannot do anything. I cannot make any progress. And this Maya is explained here as happiness is Shudra or ridiculous or insignificant, very minute, very tiny, but our desire to enjoy it is tremendous because we don't know anything better. That's a problem. And that knowledge is required. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Itham etat pura raja bhishmam dharmam vritambaram ajata shatru apracha sarvesham no anu shanvatam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Uddhav, just as you are now inquiring from me, similarly in the past, King Yudhishthir, who considered no one his enemy, he never considered even Duryodhana as his enemy, Ajat Shatru, inquired from the greatest of the upholders of religious principles, Bhishma Dev, while all of us were carefully listening. So obviously this was when Bhishma Dev was on the bed of arrows. Nivritte bharate yuddhe suhrin nidhanna vivala shrutva dharman bahun paschan moksha dharman prachat. When the great battle of Kurukshetra had ended, King Yudhishthira was overwhelmed by the death of many beloved well-wishers. Thus, after listening to instructions about many religious principles, he finally inquired about the path of liberation. Tanam te abhidhasyami deva vritta mukhashrutam jnana viragya vijnana shraddha bhakti upabrahmitam. I'll now speak unto you those religious principles of Vedic knowledge, detachment, self-realization, faith, and devotional service that were heard directly from the mouth of Bhishmadev. So even at the bed of arrows, Bhishmadev gave wonderful instructions. Nave kadash panchatrina bhavana bhuteshu ye nave iksheta thekam apiyeshu tadgyanam mam nishchitam. I personally approve of that knowledge by which one sees the combination of 9, 11, 5, and 3 elements in all living entities, and ultimately one element with those 28. 9, 11, 5, and 3. So that is 28. The 9 elements are material nature, the living entity, the Mahatattva, false ego, and the 5 objects of sense perception, namely sound, touch, form, taste, and aroma. The 11 elements are the 5 working senses, the voice, hands, legs, anus, and genitals, plus the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, the ears, touch, eyes, tongue, and nostrils, along with the coordinative sense, the mind. The five elements are the five physical elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and sky. And the three elements are the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. All living entities, from mighty Lord Brahma down to an insignificant weed, manifest material bodies composed of these 28 elements. The one element within all 28 is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Super Soul, who's all pervading within the material and spiritual worlds. So this is the real Sankhya philosophy. There are 28 elements, but Super Soul is one that's combining everything and is all pervading. And without him, the interaction of all these other 28 elements, it cannot happen. One can easily understand that the material universe is composed of innumerable causes and effects. Since Lord Krishna is the cause of all causes, all secondary causes and their effects are ultimately non-different from the personality of Godhead. This understanding constitutes real knowledge or jnana, which is essential for perfecting one's life. एतद् देवहि विज्ञानं न तथैकेन येन यत् स्थिति उत्पत्ति अप्ययाद् पश्येद भावानां त्रिगुणात्मनाम्. When one no longer sees the 28 separated material elements which arise from a single cause, but rather sees the cause itself, the personality of God, at that time one's direct experience is called Vijnana or self-realization. So this is real Vigyan, not the Vigyan that they teach us in the schools. Science, they call it science. The difference between Gyan, ordinary Vedic knowledge, and Vigyan, self-realization, can be understood as follows. A conditioned soul, although cultivating Vedic knowledge, continues to identify himself to some extent with the material body and mind, and consequently with the material universe. In trying to understand the world he lives in, the conditioned soul learns through Vedic knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the one supreme cause of all material manifestations. He comes to understand the world around him, which he accepts more or less as his world. As he progresses in spiritual realization, breaking through the barrier of bodily identification and realizes the existence of the eternal soul, he gradually identifies himself as part and parcel of the spiritual world Vaikuntha. At that time, he is no longer interested in the personality of Godhead merely as a supreme explanation of the material world. Rather, he begins to reorient his entire mode of consciousness so that the central object of his attention is the personality of Godhead. Such a reorientation is required since the Supreme Lord is a factual center and cause of everything. A self-realized soul in the stage of Vijnana thus experiences the personality of Godhead not merely as a creator of the material world, but as a supreme living entity existing blissfully in his own eternal context. As one progresses in one's realization of the Supreme Lord, in his own abode in the spiritual sky, one gradually becomes disinterested in the material universe and ceases to define the Supreme Lord in terms of his temporary manifestations. Temporary manifestation. One of the temporary manifestations is Paramatma feature, because it's not in the spiritual world. Another is the universal form. It's only material form in the material universe, nothing to do with the spiritual world. A self-realized soul in the stage of Vijnana is not at all attracted by objects that are created, maintained, and ultimately destroyed. The stage of Gyan is a preliminary stage of knowledge for those still identifying themselves in terms of the material universe, whereas Vijnana is a mature stage of knowledge for those who see themselves as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So theoretical knowledge is when we understand we are not this material world is made of all these 28 elements. And then there is Supreme Lord, Super Soul. existing. Without him, all the interactions is not possible. Then he starts seeing beyond the material. He sees a super soul, and then he sees further, goes further, and that is that Bhagwan is beyond that. Then there's a relationship with Bhagwan. So then the sadhaka or devotee or the self-realized soul, he doesn't see these material elements everywhere. He only sees Bhagwan. Adavante cha madhye cha srijyat srijyam yadan vyat punastat prati sankrame yachechet tadev sat. Commencement, termination, and maintenance. Commencement means creation, operation, and termination and dissolution are the stages of material causation, that which consistently accompanies all these material phases from one creation to another and remains alone when all material phases are annihilated, is the one eternal. And this is what Krishna is, or Vishnu is. He is there before the creation and he is there after the destruction and throughout all the other phases also. The Lord here reiterates that the one Supreme Personality of Godhead is the basis of unlimited material variety. Material activity is a chain of cause and effect relationships by which innumerable objects are produced. A particular material effect is converted into a subsequent one, cause. And when the causal phase is terminated, the effect disappears. Fire causes firewood to burn to ashes, and when the causal function of fire is finished, fire itself, which was the effect of a previous cause, is also terminated. The simple fact is that all material objects are created, maintained, and ultimately annihilated by the supreme potency of the Lord. And when the entire field of material cause and effect is withdrawn, so that all cause and effect relationships vanish, the personality of Godhead remains in his own abode. So he is the only one who remains. Rest, everything is created, maintained, and annihilated. Therefore, although innumerable objects may function as causes, they are not the ultimate or supreme cause. Sarva Karanam is Krishna, nobody else. The supreme cause. Only the personality of Godhead is the absolute cause. Similarly, all the material things may exist, they do not always exist. The personality of Godhead alone has absolute existence. By the process of jnana or knowledge, one should understand the supreme position of the Lord. So the cause and effects, or we say, oh, this is the cause of this thing. Just like here it is. Fire causes firewood to burn to ashes. But fire also has a cause somewhere else. Fire doesn't exist on its own. So here in the material world, we always complain, now you're the cause of my distress, or because of you, this happened to me and that happened to me. But if you go further up, okay, that thing happened because I did something. It is a reaction to my karma. So ultimately, one has to understand it was my desire and Krishna provided everything for the karma to happen. So cause and effect, ultimate cause is Krishna. But he is not, we cannot put a blame on him because it was our desire. So anyway, some technical knowledge is beginning to happen. So we'll stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments. Okay, you all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Jai Shri Prabhupada.